Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today's lecture is about the physiological anatomy of the brainstem. At the end of this lecture, the students will be able to know different anatomical components of the brainstem and can explain the importance of each component in explaining functions of the nervous system. The three major divisions of the brainstem are recognizable. That includes medulla, pons, and midbrain. As we see from this diagram, midbrain, pons, and medulla. The internal longitudinal divisions of the medulla includes tectum, number 2, tegmentum, and number 3, bases. In this manner, the pons is composed of two major parts. Number 1, dorsal, pontine, tegmentum, and ventral. Bases, pons. If we talk about the internal structure of the brainstem is composed of descending and ascending tracts. All descending tracts terminate in the spinal cord They pass through the brainstem. In addition, several descending fiber systems terminate or originate in the brainstem. The most important descending tract that I want to mention here is cortico-spinal tract. Similarly, all ascending tracts, for example, two most important one are spinothalamic and dorsal column tracts. That reach the brainstem or the cerebral cortex pass through all parts of this region, that means brainstem. The brainstem is therefore called the relay station for many longitudinal pathways, both descending and ascending. The second thing that is important component of the brainstem are the cranial nerve nuclei. Almost all the cranial nerve nuclei means the 12 cranial nerve nuclei except olfactory and optic nerve are present in the brainstem. The olfactory and optic nerves are evaginations of the brain itself. Portions of the cranial nerve also pass through the brainstem. Then the third internal structure is the cerebellar peduncles. The information to and from cerebellum passes through the brainstem. With the help of cerebellar peduncles. Then the fourth component is the reticular formation. Reticular formation is basically cluster of nuclei that form a nerve network. The reticular nuclei are present in three portions. Number one, dorsal tegmentum, ventral tegmentum, and the third portion where nuclei are present, these are central and inferior nuclei. Central and inferior nuclei located in the medulla. The fifth component that we include in the internal structure of the brainstem are the monoaminergic pathways. These are three in number. Number one, serotonergic pathways. Number two, noradrenergic pathways. Number three are the dopaminergic pathways. Serotonergic pathways, they arise from the rough nucleus of pons, while the noradrenergic pathways, they arise in the lateral reticular formation plus from the locus ceruleus. The dopaminergic pathways, these arise from the substantia nigra of midbrain. As the name indicates, midbrain, it is present in the center of the brain and it connects forebrain to the hindbrain. Midbrain is composed of three important features. Number one, two lateral halves, cerebral aqueduct. Number three, tectum. The two lateral cerebral halves are called cerebral peduncle. Cerebral peduncle is composed of anterior and posterior parts. The anterior part of cerebral peduncle on each side are called crus cerebri. So this portion is the crus cerebri. The crus cerebri on each side contains corticospinal tracts, corticopontine tracts, and corticobulbar axons of corticobulbar tracts. The posterior part of the cerebral peduncle is called tegmentum. Basically, the anterior and posterior halves, they are separated from each other by the substantia nigra, that is a mass of gray matter. It separates crus cerebri from the tegmentum. The tegmentum of midbrain is composed of three important parts. Number one, rear nucleus. Number two, substantia nigra. Number three, reticular nuclei. The substantia nigra, it is called black substance of the midbrain, and it plays a role in revolt and movement. Then is the red portion, that is called the red nucleus, and the red nucleus, it plays a role in movement. So it helps in controlling movements. Then is the third portion, that is the reticular formation. The reticular formation is composed of as we have mentioned in the previous slide, it is composed of a cluster of different nuclei that plays a role in sleep, mood, pleasure, pain, and muscle reflexes. Then the midbrain, as we have mentioned, is composed of very important feature that is called cerebral aqueduct. It the cerebral aqueduct, it connects third and fourth ventricles. Then the last portion of the midbrain is tectum. Tectum is located posteriorly in the midbrain, and the tectum is composed of four swellings: two superior and two inferior swellings. The superior swellings are called superior colliculi, while the inferior swellings are called inferior colliculi. The superior colliculus It receives input from eye and control eye movements. Some of the axons of superior colliculus form third and fourth cranial nerve. The inferior colliculus, it receives sensory information from the ears and serves as an important relay station for auditory information en route to thalamus. The next portion of the brainstem is the pons. Pons means bridge that connects different parts of the brain with one another. Pons lies superior to medulla and anterior to cerebellum. The pons consist of number one, nuclei, number two, sensory tracts, number three, motor tracts. Along the midline of the pons are the RAF nuclei. These contain serotonin containing neurons that project wildly to the cortex, hippocampus, basal ganglia, thalamus, cerebellum, and spinal cord. These RAF nuclei are important for controlling level of arousal. Number two, modulate sleep, wakeful fullness cycle. They also modulate sensory input, particularly for the brain. The pons contains also vestibular nuclei along with medulla. These vestibular nuclei are components of equilibrium, pathway for the inner ear to brain. Other important nuclei in the pons are nuclei that are located in the pneumotaxic center plus apneustic center, and the nuclei in these two centers, they control breathing along with the medullary rhythmic area. The cranial nerve nuclei that are present in the pons include four pairs of cranial nerve nuclei. These include motor nuclei of cranial nerve 5, and these nuclei they give rise to fifth cranial nerve. Then they also contain nucleus of cranial nerve 6, and from this nucleus the axons arise and they form sixth cranial nerve. In the same manner, the nucleus of seventh cranial nerve, they are also present in the pons, and these nuclei they give rise to seventh cranial nerve. In the same manner, the nuclei that are called vestibular nuclei of vestibulocochlear nerve, that is the eighth cranial nerve, they are also present in the pons. Through the pons, as we have mentioned, the brainstem is the relay station between the periphery of the body and the cerebrum. So the sensory tracts and motor tracts they pass through the pons. The most important sensory tracts are the spinothalamic tract plus dorsal column tracts. The fibers of these tracts they join the medial lemniscus and they ascend upward towards the cerebral cortex. The fibers from the upper half of the body they are located laterally, while the fibers from the lower half of the body they are located medially. Motor tracts includes number 1 corticospinal tracts that arise from the cerebral cortex and they pass to the spinal cord. In addition to corticospinal tract, the pontocerebellar fibers cerebellar fibers also arise from the pontine areas. In addition to pontocerebellar fibers, the tectospinal fibers. Tectospinal fibers, they also pass through pons. These tectospinal fibers, they arise from the midbrain and pass all the way through the pons to reach spinal cord. Medulla oblongata, it forms the inferior part of the brainstem and it is continuous with the superior part of the spinal cord. The white matter contains all sensory and motor tracts that extend between the spinal cord and other parts of the brain. Some of the white matter's fibers, they form bulges in the anterior part and these bulges are called pyramids. These pyramids are formed by large corticospinal tracts that pass from the cerebrum to the spinal cord, and these tracts control voluntary movements of limbs and trunk. Just superior to the junction of the medulla with the spinal cord, 80% of the fibers of corticospinal tract, they cross to the opposite side. In the same manner, 80% fibers in the right pyramid, they also cross to the opposite side, thus forming what is called decussation of pyramids. This explains this crossing of fibers to the opposite side, explains why each side of the brain controls voluntary movements. Controls voluntary movements on opposite side of the body. In the posterior part of medulla, two important group of nuclei are located, and these are called right and left gracile and cuneate nucleus. The axons from these nuclei cross the midline and ascend to thalamus in a bundle of white matter called medial lemniscus, and this medial lemniscus then extends through pons midbrain to the thalamus. The inferior, in addition to these features, the inferior olivary nucleus is located just lateral to each pyramid in a swelling called olive. The inferior olivary nucleus, it receives input from cerebral cortex, red nucleus of midbrain, and from spinal cord, and extend its axons, extend after receiving input from the cerebral cortex, red nucleus, and from the spinal cord. The axons, they extend into the cerebellum. This is very important connection for the cerebellum. In addition to all these features, the nuclei of the ninth, cranial nerve, 10th cranial nerve, 11th cranial nerve, and 12th cranial nerve, they are also located in the medulla oblongata. The medulla also have cardiovascular center and medullary rhythmicity area. The cardiovascular center regulate heart rate, force of contraction, and also regulate diameter of blood vessels. These functions are performed by the cardiovascular center by receiving input from the heart through ninth cranial nerve and through 10th cranial nerve. After receiving input from the heart, the cardiovascular center located in the medulla oblongata, it sends signals through the sympathetic chain back to the SA node. Thus, SA node controls heart rate. The fibers are also distributed to the ventricles to control force of contraction. The fibers are also distributed to the blood vessels to regulate their diameter. In the same manner, the medullary rhythmicity area is also present in the medulla oblongata, and this area contains dorsal group of neurons. That's why they are called inspiratory area. When this area is active, it causes contraction of diaphragm and external intercostal muscles that leads to normal quiet breathing. When the activity of this area is suppressed, then the diaphragm and the external intercostal muscles, they relax, and when they relax, the process of normal quiet expiration occurs. The clinical correlation of medulla is that when there is fatal injury to the medulla, that may occur from hard blow to the back of head or upper part of neck. This may lead to damage to the rhythmicity area. If the rhythmicity area becomes damaged, it leads to death. When there is non-fatal injury to the medulla, it leads to cranial nerve malfunctions on the same side and paralysis and loss of sensations on the opposite side, as the fibers of ascending tracks, they cross in the medulla oblongata to the opposite side, or they cross in the spinal cord to the opposite side. That's why the paralysis and loss of sensations occurs on the opposite side. The third feature may be irregularities in the breathing or the heart rhythm. In case of the third clinical correlation is in case of alcohol overdose. When a patient is having high dose of alcohol, this suppresses the medullary rhythmicity area, and by disturbing the respiratory system, it may lead to death if not treated. The summary of brainstem functions is that number one, it controls or regulate autonomic functions like respiratory function and heart functions. Then the brainstem also maintains balance and equilibrium. The brainstem also plays a role in movement coordination. The brainstem acts as a relay station of sensory information all the way to the cerebral cortex. With this, we have come to an end to this lecture. May Allah Pak keep you safe and healthy. In the next lecture, we will study the physiological anatomy of the spinal cord. Thank you very much, dear students, for being with us.